You're listening to The Rich Life Revolution with me, Michelle Cooper. My mission is to empower you to step into your next level of wealthy. You'll hear all the deets, a little bit of inspiration, and real life takeaways so that you can create your own rich life revolution. Let's dig in. Hey girl, hey. It's me, Michelle, host of The Rich Life Revolution. Welcome to episode 53. OMG. In today's episode, we are talking all about microdosing and the psychedelic journey with my guest, Dana Harvey. Now, Dana spent 3 decades in the world of corporate communication before she made a 180-degree pivot. She decided to put her communication skills to work, sharing the benefits of a maligned but hugely promising therapy with the people it has the potential to help, rather than convincing investors to buy into it. Dana is the founder of the Flourish Academy, an experienced coach and mentor, and she focuses her years of experience on guiding people through psychedelic journeys and using evidence-based research to dispel the myths and misinformation around these medications. She joins me to share her knowledge of and passion for helping others with some great tips for learning more, microdosing, and finding a facilitator to own your psychedelic journey. So let's dig in with Dana. Hello, friend. How are you?
Oh, Michelle, it is so good to see you. I'm doing great.
For all of you who don't know, my dear guest, Dana Harvey, is amazing and such an incredible woman living her best life. We met many years ago. She has worked with me personally. She inspires me all the time. If you're not following her on social media, be sure to do that because she's out living her best life and adventuring around the world. But I'm going to pause for a moment and I'm going to invite you to brag about yourself for a little bit.
Brag about myself. Oh my goodness. That's different than telling your story, right?
I know.
What am I going to say about myself? I think I'll just start with what I love. I really love to support people who are really interested and motivated to transform their lives. And over the past many years, but particularly the last about 4 or 5 years, I have had the opportunity to do that and really kind of honed my skills. So I have about 2 decades of mentoring and coaching experience, but in the last 4 years, I've really married that together with work with psychedelic medicines to really enhance and accelerate the work that people are doing personally on themselves. And it's been a joy and a pleasure and something that I must be okay at because the business keeps coming.
Absolutely. So I'm going to rewind a little bit, take us back so that people can understand a little bit more in depth about your story. So when we first met, you had a very successful C-suite corporate position with an incredible company. And I remember a job that you initially were over the moon excited about.
Mm-hmm.
And then things started to shift a little bit for you. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, sure. So I had built for over 3 decades, I'd built a career in corporate communications, global corporate communications, with kind of a niche specialty in communications for emerging industries and new technologies. So where the comms rules hadn't really been written yet. And around at the time that we were working with each other, I think that's the second time I was working and coaching with you, I had been hired by a publicly traded psychedelic medicine company. So this was, even though psychedelics have been around since time immemorial, they were re-emerging after a hiatus since the 1970s as a legitimate, promising treatment for a lot of mental health diagnoses. And so I was hired in to be CCO, Chief Communications Officer, and Head of Investor Relations for one of the leading publicly traded companies. And I was thrilled. I had already had some of my own transformations, shifts in my life from psychedelic medicine. So I understand personally the potential. And this position gave me the opportunity to understand the research, the history, the politics, the marketing, like everything else behind psychedelic medicine. And really, I became really, really passionate about how incredible these medicines can be for shifts in your life, often for mental health diagnosis, but for a number of other things as well. And I really felt like I was doing good in the world by helping to communicate about the benefits, the potential benefits of these medicines, and helping to destigmatize, because that's actually the biggest piece behind them getting readopted is the stigma. But I also was struggling a bit in this career, like penultimate job of my career, and things that I used to be passionate about, I found were bringing up anxiety. I couldn't put my finger on what that was. I was also still working like that startup, publicly traded life of, 18-hour days, 7 days a week. Right. Things were just like, there was just something that wasn't fitting right. And I couldn't quite put my finger on it. But I was doing my own work in therapy and in coaching. And I was working with a therapist who did work with psychedelic medicines. And I had an opportunity to do a journey that was supported by two therapists, actually. And I just had a breakthrough in this journey. It was very, very clear to me that at a bottom line, with psilocybin mushrooms, the mushrooms basically said, we got you in the right place, just not doing the right thing. And you need to step down from this like left brain, masculine, 40,000 foot level and come back down to your heart, come back to working with people at a heartfelt level. I realized that I was having a real conflict in communications because my communications audience in this job was investors. And investors have a very different perspective about these substances and these plant medicines than the people who are using it for and finding benefit. And I didn't want to be talking about the money. I didn't want to be talking about when are you going to get your return on investment. I wanted to talk about like, this is freaking amazing. People's lives are shifting. People are finding health and happiness who never found it before in their lives. And there is a lot of potential here. And I want people to know about it. And I wanted to be able to support people who were making an independent choice. They were already reading about these medicines. They were already deciding, I think this might be right for me. Well, how could I help them reduce harm, reduce risk, and increase the propensity for transformation? So I ended up resigning from my position and diving headfirst into training, educating myself, being mentored. I got to apprentice with my own therapist, until I got to the point where I felt like I actually had something of value that I could support people in reducing risk and increasing propensity for transformation.
So the mushrooms helped, like they helped you guide the way for you, which I think is amazing. But was it still scary to take that leap?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. It was terrifying. Even telling my family that I was going to take the leap was terrifying, right? Like, I've built a career for 3 decades in this area. I'm in a C-suite position. I have financial security and abundance. I have like a lot of my ego tied up in this identity of me as a C-suite executive, like, which I didn't even realize until I stepped away, just how much of my identity was caught up in that. But it was a huge leap of faith. And you really worked with me and helped me to like embrace it and to get over my imposter syndrome, get over my lack of confidence, it was terrifying.
Yeah. I specifically remember a conversation we had where you were like, I need this certification and this certification and this like it was like a list of stuff, right? And that is always, that comes from that very masculine side of our brain. I have a really good friend who's a therapist who is constantly doing more certifications in more things. And I'm always like, the best coaches are the people who are on the field with the people. They're in the arena. They don't have to have the degree or the certification or the thing necessarily. If you're going to be a coach, you have to know how to be a coach, right? About asking questions and, all that kind of stuff. But like having a piece of paper that says that you got a certification really isn't the determiner, I think, of a really good coach or a facilitator, right? And so I remember those conversations where you were like, but I need this and this and this. And I was like, these are objections. These are objections to stop you from stepping into what's truly calling you.
Absolutely. In fact, it's my writing from this morning. Don't look too closely, but an empowered decision that you and I worked with is still written down by me at least twice a day, which was what I know now is powerful and enough to help transform lives. And just like being able to embody that is what really, eventually got me to the point where I could share what I knew and what I'd experienced with other people and know that I was making a difference in their lives. There's always more to learn. But I was really like blocking myself. And you even coached me on coaching. So we did a lot of work around this.
Well, I'm not going to take credit for all the awesomeness that is you, but you were a lot of fun to work with because you were coachable as well, right? Like you were willing to see the gaps and you were willing to take action, which is really important and totally coachable. But I want to dive into the psychedelics thing because, as you said, there is a stigma there. And I see a variety of stigmas. Now, I've had my own experience with psychedelics, anything from ayahuasca to MDMA to psilocybin, right? And I did a microdosing with you, which microdosing is my favorite. And, some people are like, but there's no like dramatic thing that happens, right? And I'm like, well, maybe that's our conditioning, that there is supposed to be this dramatic event. Because sometimes, I've had friends and colleagues who've done lots of things like ayahuasca and stuff and had really great things happen, and some have had really awful things happen. But for me, if I look back on everything, I think one of the most transformative things I did was the microdosing with you. It was over an extended period of time. And it was this very gentle, quite feminine transformation, which felt very natural. And so I'm going to back up there and go back to that stigma. There's the whole kind of like, the stigma of drug use and stuff like that, right? And there's this stigma of it being woo-woo and crazy and all hippy-dippy and all that kind of stuff. Are there other stigmas that you see out there in the world because this is your world?
Well, I think for people like me and probably you in the same kind of time frame, we grew up with the war on drugs, and this is your brain on drugs with the fried egg,
Right.
And
not that it stopped me.
Exactly. But I think, like what happened in the 1970s was psychedelics were well researched. There were thousands of clinical trials on LSD, psilocybin, MDMA, etc. before the 1970s. And what happened in the 1970s is that these medicines got out of the labs and they got into the counterculture, and they really raised fear in the US government because the counterculture was associated with boycotting the war in Vietnam, which is, wasn't very helpful for their government. So they effectively outlawed all psychedelics in the 1970s under the war on drugs, and immediately shut down any access to them, even for clinical trials. So even people who were in the middle of a clinical trial and who were getting benefits from it were immediately shut off and shut down from that. So a lot of the stigma that's around these days is still around that 1970s war on drugs. And the fact that in many places, in most places, in fact, most psychedelics are still illegal. So there is a legality issue around it. Now, bureaucracies, governments, health authorities around the world are getting on board and realizing that the research that was now allowed to happen again is showing undeniable results. So Australia is the first federal country that has now completely legalized psychedelics for specific conditions. In Canada, in fact, you can get access to MDMA for post-traumatic stress syndrome and to psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression or end-of-life anxiety through special ways that you need to work with Health Canada. Psychedelics are legalized in Oregon and in California. And in many, many municipalities, the US has a different legal structure, so they can legalize at a municipal level and state levels. In Canada, it's federal. So it's taking us a little bit longer in Canada, but Toronto and Vancouver have effectively decriminalized psychedelics. In both the city government and the police departments have come together and said this is the lowest on our list. So that means everything is working, like it's going in the right direction and it's becoming more mainstream. You know, like the Georgia Straight here is covering them, like mainstream magazines, and there's TV shows and, you know, a lot of things where people can get really legitimate information now that's helping them to make up their minds that they might like to try these and that the promise, the good that can come from them versus the risks.
Yeah, I think that's so good, right? Because, you know, like you and I, we grew up, well, I grew up, I know you have traveled a lot and lived abroad, but I grew up in BC and yeah, it's kind of the hippie part of Canada, right? And we had, you know, magic mushrooms growing in our garden. And, you know, my brother grew his own marijuana, still does. And, you know, like it was just that kind of stuff has always been around. I didn't realize the therapeutic benefits until, you know, I was like, you know, into my 40s kind of thing. I was pleasantly surprised to see that my brother has cancer. And I saw something at the Abbotsford Cancer Clinic talking about end-of-life anxiety treatment through psilocybin. And, you know, if you're interested in this, please come talk to us kind of thing. I was like, well, that's really good. These things are really important because it can change your life, as you and I both know. And so for you, you had this experience, game changer for your life. You made a big move and you moved into an area that has, as we said, some stigma. Can you share with us, like, was there a reaction from your friends and family? Were people like, oh my God, has Dana gone off the deep end? Like,
I was really afraid of that. And I do have to say that, yes, there is a certain percentage of my colleagues and friend group that really are just not open to the concept of it and probably do think that I've just gone off the deep end. They just don't want to hear about it. But the majority of my friends and family, definitely my family, like I can point to the research. I can give you the information. I can give you what I'm basing this on. And I think the biggest thing for them is the change that they saw in me. And they're like, what? Can I have some of that? You know, like right. You're so happy with your life and you're making these big life changes. And like, I actually manifested my new husband. Right. Got married and like all sorts of good stuff was happening in my life. And I really like for friends and family, how can they ever, you know, have any objection when they see how happy and fulfilled you are as a person, right? So even if they're not interested in it themselves, they're happy for me and they know that I know that I'm doing good in the world. And that's really important to me.
Yeah. So if somebody is like wanting to like learn more or, you know, dip their toe in the water in this part of the world, what's something that they can do?
Well, that's such a good question. One of the things that has been really important to me is accessibility for this education and accessibility for these therapies. And so for the past 3 years, myself and my team have been hosting conversations on the Clubhouse app, which was a real big hit during the pandemic. It's an audio only app for iPhones and Androids. But it's a great place to host conversations because you can have it's like a phone-in talk radio shows. So you get into Clubhouse, you find the club or the radio station that you're interested in, and then you tune in and you can either listen and or you can participate. So 3 times a week, every week for the past 3 years, my team and I have hosted shows with world-leading experts from around the world on pretty much everything to do with psychedelics, spirituality, sensuality, self-help, those things that go together. So this is soon going to be also broadcast on sort of syndicated podcast channels as well, but I don't really want to take it off of Clubhouse because one of my pillars is cultivating supportive communities. And on Clubhouse, you have a community. You can all talk with each other. You can support each other, help each other. So we do about 45 minutes is kind of podcast style with these leading experts from around the world. And then 45 minutes is audience participation. So come with your questions, come with your shares, come to be supported or to give support. And those, well, I'm sure we'll share the link for it, but those are 9 until 10:30 Pacific, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday of every week. And Wednesdays is entheogens and the divine feminine, alternating with entheogens and the divine masculine. Thursdays is psychedelic microdosing 101, so everything around microdosing. And Fridays is psychedelics 101. So yeah, free education and community on the Clubhouse app.
That is awesome. I love that. And I think you should repurpose that over into YouTube or something like that, just so that you can reach an even bigger audience.
Yeah, that is the plan now. And it's funny because I've never monetized it. And I realize now it's time to monetize it. But for me, well, one of the reasons why is this pillar. I basically had 3 pillars given to me in this journey, which was provide loving guidance, share evidence-based knowledge, and cultivate supportive communities. So creating the community there, we have a community of 3,500 people there now. And the other part was that I got to educate myself on everything and anything I want to be educated on around psychedelics, because I have a large enough audience that the experts are excited to come and talk to us. And so some people, we have 3 years of replays there. So if you can't join live, you can listen later. And some people have said that they've never actually gone on. We're talking about certifications and stuff. They've never gone on to get training or certification because they feel they've got an entire course load just from all those replays. So the benefit to me was, and always has been, like ongoing education for myself to share with others.
I love that. That's so good. And yeah, I think these things should be accessible. That's a really key piece, that the information is out there. It's available to people. It's understandable. It's bite-sized. It's like you don't have to have a PhD to understand what you're talking about, right? Because it can seem like a big subject to get into. And I've seen some irresponsibility in this area where people have a journey for themselves and suddenly they decide they're going to facilitate journeys. And to me, it's a very vulnerable place that you put yourself in. And it's not something that I take lightly.
Oh, absolutely, for sure.
Yeah. So I actually fell out with a friend who did a psilocybin journey and then decided that, she was going to facilitate journeys. And I was like, but like, you don't have, clearly I'm not hung up on having a qualification, but I was like, you've done it once. Like, you're not even a coach. Like, you're a yoga instructor. It feels irresponsible to me and kind of dangerous almost.
It is dangerous, and it's something to really be wary of and aware of. And if you are going to work with somebody to support you with this kind of work, make sure you interview them very, very well. Ask them what their experience is. Ask them where they mentored or apprenticed or trained. Ask them about their own use of psychedelics. Ask them if you can speak to someone that they've worked with. Because it is a gray area, there isn't regulation yet. So basically anybody can put their hat on and say that they're a shaman and that they can heal you or anything, So definitely be wary and do your research. And you must trust this person implicitly because, like you said, you're in a very vulnerable and suggestive state. And the most important thing for getting real benefit out of this is being able to really kind of trust the process and surrender to the experience. And if you're not quite sure about who's supporting you, there's no way you'll be able to do that in the first place.
Yeah. I don't think that in the situations I have put myself in therapeutically, I was very confident with who I was with. And so that enabled me to just let go and allow whatever to come through. And, that's what it's, kind of like you only get out of it what you put in, right?
It is 100%. Yeah. Yeah. I would say for myself, there's a couple of things that I do to ensure my safety as well as the people I work with safety. When I am facilitating a large dose journey, I always work with a partner. I always work with a male partner because, again, you just don't know what's going to come up and where you might need some masculine energy or some feminine energy coming in to support you, or where something from the past may be projected onto your facilitator. You may see me all of a sudden as your mother who you had a horrible relationship with and you just project it out onto me. I need to be able to turn to my partner to support you during that. So if I'm working one-on-one with a client, it's actually always two-on-one. And the other way I keep safe is I facilitate for an organization called Gathering Groups. And this is an incredible model that they have. First of all, it's a two-eyed seeing approach. So it really brings together the best of what Western evidence along with the indigenous teachings and learnings and ways of being. And it involves 8 weeks of preparation in a small group, maximum 8, and then a 2-night psilocybin retreat at about week 8, and then 4 weeks of integration afterwards, and then feeding into a larger alumni community. So there is a lot. I have peers, I have oversight. There's always 2 facilitators for every group. And also, because one facilitator always needs to be a registered clinical counselor, you can, in fact, have this treatment covered by private health insurance and extended medical benefits.
Well, that's amazing.
Yeah. And the safety of having that preparation and that integration. Without that, a psychedelic experience is pretty much just an experience. But if you are really, really well prepared, kind of the language of the mushrooms, you've been taught things like breath work, body work, how to listen with your body, kind of the language of the mushrooms, you're going to be able to let go and trust the process. You're going to be much more open to the propensity for transformation. And then there's a saying and a book by a guy named Jack Kornfield called After the Ecstasy, Then the Laundry. And that's where what we call integration. It's after the experience. Well, what are you going to do with that experience? How are you going to make sense of it? How are you going to embody it so that your life actually does change? And so that's the work that comes after the experience. When you're plunked back into your normal everyday life and you are doing the laundry, how's that experience going to affect you? So it's really the integration and the preparation are critical to safe and transformational psychedelic experiences.
So if somebody is like, should I think about microdosing or macrodosing, or is there like a rule of guidance or anything, or like if somebody had that question for you, what do you kind of go through with them?
Yeah, I wouldn't say there's kind of a general rule of thumb. It would always start by looking at what is your intention. Like, why are you looking to psychedelics for support? And from there, we may be able to establish a plan, whether microdosing or a large dose journey or peak journey might be a better fit for you. There's a lot of things to take into consideration around your medical conditions, your medications, your medical background, your mental health background. So we always do very, very thorough screenings for both microdosing and large dose journeys. A couple of things to note. I find it very interesting, like you were talking about microdosing being a very feminine, flowing, kind of soft approach. The majority of men that come to me to talk about psychedelic experiences, they want to jump in, they want to get her done, they want the big bang, they want the big dose journey, they want the outcome. And the majority of women that come to me are like, let's talk about microdosing. And I think, that's where I started, was with groups like I did with you, of taking women like me through microdosing journeys. And one of the things I really love about microdosing is, if you're new to psychedelics, it's a great way to just dip your toe in and start to build a relationship with these medicines, start to understand how they work, how you react to them. And also, microdosing is at such a minute level, if you're actually taking a microdose, many people take more than a microdose, that it will not affect your everyday life. You can work, you can drive, you can take care of your kids, you can have social obligations. It's almost like at a cellular level in the background. So it's not like you need to take off time off work or, really adjust your life in order to incorporate the practice of microdosing. And it's a great way even to prepare for or integrate from a larger dose journey as well. So there's a lot of factors to take into consideration, including what you're called to.
So yeah, you bring up a really good thing, right? Because I remember a mentor of mine was encouraging me to participate in an ayahuasca ceremony. It was like a 3-day thing. But I also remember him saying, like, you have to feel called to this. It's either a calling or it's not, kind of thing.
Absolutely.
And I had enough nervousness around it to know that it wasn't a calling at that time for me. And like, full transparency for all our listeners, like, psychedelic drugs were my drug of choice in my 20s. I loved LSD. Mushrooms were my thing. Like, I loved all of that. And I would probably say I loved it too much and almost got to the point where I required that in order to have a good time. So when I first started to go down this path in my life of exploration and transformation, I was very nervous about it because I would say that I had an addiction to that in my 20s. And it was only when I went into kind of like having kids that I stopped all drug use, right? But I felt nervous and I felt like, is this a kind of like a gateway almost to me to go back into that? And I don't want to do that. But what I did love, and I talked to you about that, I was really open about that with you in the microdosing piece. And, you were so great in helping me understand that that was that period of time in those circumstances. And this is a very different Michelle in different circumstances. And it was also doing it for different reasons. And I think, to share, like, when I did the microdosing journeys with you, I found it very helpful to the way you walked us through setting a very, very clear intention, like very clear. And, it was a group of women and there were some women who didn't have such a clear intention at first. And you really worked with people like, let's get more clear on this, right? Like, we're not just here taking mushrooms just to see what happens. My intention was a stronger connection to source and an understanding of how intuition shows up in my life. And holy moly, honestly, it's never been the same since that. Like, I have such a clear connection to source. It's not even a thing anymore. Like, it's not even a thought. I just know. And it's not even like I remember I used to hear people say, oh, I've got this download of this thing, right? Or I'm getting this message. And I used to think, wow, I wish I could have that. I don't have that. It's a constant knowingness, right? And to me, my microdosing journey with you opened up kind of like there's a third eye. It opened up that portal and helped me have that connection to source and also prioritize what supports me. So for me, I live my life based on nature and the seasons of nature and that kind of thing. And so when we went into winter, I changed my whole schedule so that I could be outside in the middle of the day in the daylight, walking my dogs in the forest for an hour and a half because I need that connection to the planet. I need that connect. I need to be in the trees. It might sound a little hippie or woo woo or whatever, but like winter is hard for me. I like the sun. And so it was like, no, this is what I have to do in order to live in the Northern Hemisphere, right above the 49th parallel, where it gets dark at 4 o'clock. And I don't think I could have done that before because I would have been saying, oh, I got to work, was it like make hay during the sunlight or I don't know, whatever they say, right? It was like, I've got to work. I've got to do these things. I can't take an hour and a half off in the middle of the day to go walk around in the forest, right? Like I got jobs to do, but it really gave me that connection and confidence. And then I got really clear of what my intuition feels like in my body. And I don't think that I've done a lot of stuff. I've done a lot of breath work and energy work and all the things. But I am so clear now of what my intuition feels like that it's not even a second choice. Like there's no second guessing it or anything. It's like, yeah, no, that's for me. Or that's not for me.
That feels so good. That just feels so good to hear. And there were three things that came up that I wanted to touch on. The first is around intentions. So there's actually been some research done that a very, very clear intention can be the difference between people having a successful microdosing experience versus those who just say like, I don't know, maybe it worked or it didn't work. So that is a critical key building block. And the way that I see it is your intention is your North Star. So it's going to keep you on track for the work that you need to be doing to get to where you want to be. And at the same time, psychedelics are called non-specific amplifiers. So they bring things up in you and amplify what is already alive for you. So you want that intention to be alive for you. So basically the mushroom knows what to amplify, or the molecule knows what to amplify. The second thing you were talking about was intuition. And I would say across the board, particularly working with microdosing psilocybin, even when that is not the intention, that is one of the things that just tends to happen is people drop into listening to their intention or to their intuition, trusting their intuition, and just like being connected and in tune with themselves. And then the third thing that you said is that, you did this like a number of years ago with me, and that hasn't changed. And that's like a really important key piece about microdosing is it's actually not like a pharmaceutical model, like an antidepressant or something. It's not meant to be done every day for the rest of your life. You have this opportunity of making new neural connections. You have neuroplasticity. There's a few neurobiological things that happen in your brain. You have this opportunity and then you stop. After 4 to 12 weeks on a protocol, you stop. And a number of people never go back because what's happened is you've made these new neural connections. You have a new baseline. The connection has been made. And why would you microdose if you don't need to?
Like it's a different model, right? Like, I think we live in this world where pharmaceuticals are like, you got to keep taking the thing to keep the thing going. And it's like, well, no, because I remember saying to you, okay, we're done. What do I do now? And you're like, you do nothing. You just see what happens. And if you're called to do it, you'll know.
Exactly.
And so I love that because I think often in the world we're in, it's like, and what's the next thing? And what's the next thing? And it's like, does there need to be a next thing? Like I said, it really opened up a different kind of portal in my life, my intuition, my connection to source, my trust. Like I just know it's all fine. It's all going to be fine. And I've had crazy things happen and people are like, how are you navigating them? I'm like, it's fine. It's all good. It's whatever is meant to be. I was just in Easter Island and one of the gals on the trip, she said, you're the most Zen person I've ever met in my life. Like, I don't know what it is with your energy. Like, what kind of drugs are you on kind of thing, right? I was like, on the drug of life. I don't know. Like, it's just, you make changes to live the life that you want to live, which is what you've done. And obviously I've done, and we have used all kinds of things to facilitate that transformation.
Absolutely. Yeah, so it's interesting. A couple of things that you've said, like when you said, it is something that you need to be called to. So number one, I don't really have like sales or a sales cycle. All I have is education, because I'm not going to tell you you should do this or you need to do this.
Right?
And I don't have repeat customers. So my business model, I know. Luckily, there's a lot of demand.
Yeah, so good. That's so funny. It's so funny. So I really love giving people like a next step. If this feels like something they're interested in pursuing or they want to learn more, you said go to Clubhouse. There's a lot of stuff on there. You gave some really great tips about, how to talk to people or interview kind of people who could be facilitators for these journeys. Is there anything that you would add if somebody is like, I've never done anything like this? It sounds interesting, but I feel kind of nervous. What would be that next step?
I would say get on my website, theflourishacademy.org, and fill in the contact form, and let's get on for a complimentary curiosity call where you can ask me all your questions and I'd be happy to answer. Yeah, anything. I lead individuals and I facilitate groups through microdosing. I also do the one-on-one or two-on-one, as we discussed, the larger journeys, and then look at gatheringgroups.ca. That is where I facilitate the small group journeys, which is an incredible model that you could be covered for with your extended medical. And I'd also like to do a shout out that with Gathering Groups, we are involved in 2 Health Canada trials for first responders at the moment. So for first responders who are interested in getting legal psychedelic therapy with psilocybin, we have 2 trials. One is for first responders who are suffering from treatment-resistant depression. Even if you haven't been diagnosed, we have psychiatrists and doctors on our team that can work with you if that is a diagnosis. And the second one that I'm so excited about, the first ever in Canada that's actually not looking at a mental health diagnosis. It's looking at wellness and keeping you well. And this is like I think this is really where the magic of these molecules is in for our world. But I think we have to go through medicalized route first, just for legalization. But this is first responders. So we'll be recruiting probably for about a year and a half on those. We have a large, and we have over 200 seats for the wellness one and over 36 for the depression. So we'll be recruiting for a while. So again, if you are a first responder or you know a first responder or you know someone who might like to help fund first responders to have this treatment, I would love to hear from you.
Okay, so I really love that because to me, I just had this conversation with my doctor because I've hit that menopause or whatever, I crossed over that line. And we had this conversation about wellness versus reacting to illness. And I was like, because I invested in a private women's clinic in Kitsilano in Vancouver, which is all about aging well. And it's proactive. It's not reactive. And my doctor, my MD, she was like, what are all these tests, this other doctor? Like, what is all this for? Because they do all these blood panels and stuff. And I was like, well, and I told her, and she said, well, you don't need that. You're in menopause now. It's fine. Right. And I was like, okay, well, I actually don't believe in being reactive. I believe in being proactive in my wellness, like cultivating my wellness instead of waiting for this thing to happen. And then I have to fix a problem, right? That like has happened in my life or my health. So I love that we're not waiting for first responders to have PTSD or suffer from depression or mental health issues or try to commit suicide because they've seen the most awful things that happen in our world. We're saying, hey, you can use this therapy, let's call it, to keep yourself well before any of that kind of stuff happens. So, so important. That's amazing. Oh my God. I am so glad that you're involved in that. And we will put a special, I don't know, tag or whatever the team do on this episode so that we can try to get you some people for that trial. I think that would be amazing.
Our first responders do so much for us, and they have just been through such a horrendous time over the last few years. And with mental health rates skyrocketing now, they're going through more and more trauma. So anything that we can do to support our first responders, yeah, I'm in.
Yeah. They're at like ground zero or whatever, right? In our world. And such an important job. I was talking to my daughter who's in a criminal justice program in university, and I was saying, like, what do you want to do when you're done with this? Like, you gonna police officer or what? And she's like, no, because I don't want to see all that stuff. Like, just in the criminal justice program, they are exposed to a lot of things. And she's like, I don't want to live my life seeing the most horrible things that life has to offer every day. I don't know what I want to do yet. I know I want to make a difference, but it's not that, right? And I was like, oh, that's true.
Yeah, it's a tough job for sure.
Yeah. Well, I am so glad that you are doing that. So that is amazing. Thank you for your contribution in that part. This has been an amazing conversation. I think it is a very informative conversation. It's such a valuable topic and valuable information. And I really encourage our listeners that if this calls to you, if it sparks your interest, you're like, I want to learn more. Or if you're a seasoned veteran in this world and you want to go deeper, to reach out to Dana, because this is just, you're so highly connected and knowledgeable and just a great resource.
Thank you so much. I'm very passionate about sharing my knowledge around this. I think it's something that our world incredibly needs at this point. So yeah, I'm always happy to jump on a call or come and check out our shows on Clubhouse and meet some other people who are also curious or involved.
And I just popped into my head. I remember I watched this movie that you shared with me, which was Fantastic Fungi, which was like, I was like, what? This movie was amazing. So informative. I had no idea that the forest communicates in the way that it does. If you want to learn more about fungi, about trees and how they work and all that kind of stuff, watch that movie.
Absolutely. It's such a beautiful movie. And it's not just about psychedelic mushrooms. It's about mushrooms, the power of mushrooms, beautiful cinematography. And that is on Netflix now. When you and I watched it at first, it was like hard to access. It's on Netflix. And another thing is there was a book by Michael Pollan called How to Change Your Mind, which was a big, big hit and really did change a lot of people's minds about the therapeutic use of these medicines. And it's now a series on Netflix. So you can check that out as well. It's excellent.
Oh, I'm going to go watch that tonight then. That's awesome. Thank you, Dana.
Such a pleasure. Thank you so much, Michelle.
I will admit, when I first heard about microdosing and even macrodosing, I thought, oh yeah, magic mushrooms. I've done that in my youth. However, I really came to understand through this conversation with Dana the value of this incredible opportunity for us to understand ourselves better and use nature in our own healing journey. Now, you may have figured out that I have microdosed with Dana's guidance, and I really want to stress that you have to do this alongside a professional who knows what they're doing, because there's a lot of people out there who are jumping on this bandwagon of psychedelics and they don't really know what they're doing. So please do your research and please connect with someone who is qualified and who has come through a trusted referral. The psychedelic journey can take many forms. from 2-week intensives with large dose therapies all the way down to microdosing with tiny daily quantities. And I think for people who are new to psychedelics and people like me who've experimented a lot in our youth, you might be a little bit hesitant to dive back in. But it does have a huge benefit of not affecting how you function should you choose that microdosing route. So I would love to hear what you thought about this, if this opened up a whole new portal of information for you, and I'd love to get your feedback. Of course, please help a gal out, help a sister out. Give us a rating on your favorite podcast platform. Select your stars, leave a review. That will help us get the Rich Life Revolution out to an even wider audience. And join me next week in episode 54, where I'm going to be diving deep into the concept of romanticizing your life. Thanks for hanging out with me. I hope you got at least one gold nugget today. Be sure to grab your copy of the Rich Life Revolution workbook to help you set the foundation for your next level of wealthy. Get it now at richliferevolution.ca, and I'll see you later.